Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When rancher Brandon Mason found concrete posts claiming his land for a suburban HOA, he thought it was a bad joke. But forged maps, fake guards, and a war over 7,000 acres were just the beginning. This wasn't a land dispute, it was an all-out battle for the truth. I hadn't been down to the southern boundary of my property in weeks. Maybe months, if I'm being honest. 7,000 acres is a lot of land to babysit, especially when most of it is hills, creek beds, and prairie grass stretching into forever. I'd been busy up north, bulls calving, irrigation lines clogging up again, and didn't have time to wander the fringes. So when my ranch manager Joe radioed in that someone had set concrete posts like border markers near Cotton Hollow, I figured it was a prank by some lost hikers, or maybe teenagers trying to start a bonfire pit. I was wrong. I took the Polaris down the western trail and cut east over the ridge. It was nearing dusk, and the light was coming in long and golden, spilling over the flatlands like honey. At first glance, I didn't see anything out of place. But as I approached the old mesquite grove near the dry creek bed, I spotted something too square, too clean. Gray posts. 6 of them, set deep in the earth with rebar, laser leveled, strung together with thick chain and capped with signs that made my jaw tighten. Property of Red Vista HOA. Trespassers will be prosecuted. My boot hit the gravel with a crunch as I stepped out staring. These weren't makeshift wooden stakes. These were installed by contractors. Someone paid to have this done, quietly, and on my land. I yanked the nearest sign off the post and flipped it over. HOA seal date, 2 weeks ago. I looked around. No footprints, no tire tracks, but someone had been here, and not just once. Then I noticed a folder lying in the grass, partially hidden under a bush, like it had been dropped in a hurry. Inside was a printed site plan with the Red Vista HOA header, a proposed Community Greenbelt Phase 1, and rough outlines of trails, benches, and a visitor kiosk right where my cattle used to drink in the spring. There was even a projected budget, $250,000. I stared at it like it might start laughing. By the time I got back to the house, I was on the phone with Joe. He told me the fencing crew had been spotted a few days back, but they packed up and left when they saw a drone flying nearby. He thought they were surveyors. I told him to start checking the trail cameras, especially on the South Ridge, and to let the hands know not to engage if they spotted anyone, but to document everything. Then came the kicker. The next morning, a neighbor texted me a photo from the local Sheridan Times. Headline, Red Vista HOA reclaims historical open space. Beneath it, a quote from a woman named Karen Branton, president of the HOA. This parcel was mistakenly handed off during a clerical error nearly a century ago. Our legal team has verified that it was never properly deeded and is now being respectfully returned to public stewardship. I dropped my coffee. My grandfather bought this land in 1954. I have the deed with his signature and the original plat map, yellowed and sealed. There is no ambiguity, no clerical error, just a woman who thinks planting signs makes her Moses parting the damn prairie. I didn't wait. I drove to the HOA office, which turned out to be in a storefront, sandwiched between a dog groomer and a Pilates studio. I walked in and asked to speak to Karen Branton. The receptionist's face dropped like I'd asked to see the Pope with no pants on. But Karen came out anyway. Early 40s, expensive blouse, expression like she was smelling something sour. "Mr. Mason, I presume," she said, like this was a play, and we were already halfway through Act 2. "Cut the theater," I said. "You're trespassing. Your people put signs on my land, and unless you want to be dealing with sheriff's deputies, you're going to pull every last post out of the ground by sundown." She smiled too calmly. "Mr. Mason, our legal counsel has advised us that this matter is under administrative review. Based on newly surfaced documentation from 1923, this area may in fact, you're citing a piece of paper from before my father was born. Based on what? A ghost story. Based on land use discrepancies acknowledged by our attorneys in the county land board. If you're uncertain of your own records, we suggest you pause any aggressive action." I stepped closer. "There's no uncertainty. What you're doing is called land fraud. And if you don't start reversing course by tomorrow, I'm bringing in attorneys who don't give warnings." She didn't flinch. "You'll be hearing from us very soon, Mr. A. Mason." I walked out without another word. My boots echoed hard on the fake tile floor. That night, I stood on the porch and looked south. Somewhere out there, beyond the hills and the creek bed, someone was laying claim to something that had been in my family longer than she'd been alive, and something told me this was just the beginning. 2 days later, I was feeding the bulls when a white SUV rolled up my private drive like it owned the place. A man in a blazer stepped out, hair too neat for the wind in these parts. He didn't look like a ranch hand or someone lost. He looked like someone who's never gotten mud on his shoes. He waved a thick envelope at me like he was offering a coupon for free landscaping. "Brandon Mason," he called. I nodded, already regretting not grabbing my coffee before walking out. "I'm here to serve you on behalf of Red Vista Meadow Homeowners Association." I didn't take the envelope. "This is private property. You're trespassing." He stepped closer and dropped it at my feet like a dead squirrel. "Consider yourself served. You'll want to read that." The SUV peeled out before I could even tell him where to shove it. I opened the envelope at the kitchen table. Inside, a formal complaint filed in district court. Plaintiff, Red Vista Meadow HOA. Defendant, me. Allegations included unlawful use of public easement land, obstruction of community infrastructure, and hostile interference with community development. Attached were glossy renderings of a community reclamation project with walking trails, fire pits, benches, and even a goddamn butterfly garden smack in the middle of my land. But what really set me off was the demand: immediate cessation of unauthorized agricultural use of Red Vista open space, and a court order to remove invasive livestock operations. I just about flipped the table. I called my attorney, Nadine Herrick, a fourth-generation Wyoming native who once sued a mining company into a permanent coma. She read the documents silently, then muttered, "They're poking the wrong bear." She told me to sit tight while she prepared a motion to dismiss and a formal property defense response. Meanwhile, she advised documenting everything and, her exact words, "Don't punch anybody in the mouth unless there are no cameras." That advice came in handy sooner than expected. The next morning, one of my ranch hands, Miguel, radioed in sounding shaken. "Brandon, they got guards out here now." I rolled up in the truck to the south end near Cotton Hollow and couldn't believe my eyes. A folding table had been set up near the makeshift entryway, with 2 rent-a-cops in polo shirts and tactical vests standing under a pop-up canopy labeled Red Vista Community Operations, Temporary Checkpoint. They even had a laminated sign-in. Sheet and cones blocking access to the trail that cut across the lower grazing path. I got out of the truck. "You two think you're TSA now?" One of them adjusted his sunglasses. "Sir, this is a restricted area under Red Vista HOA jurisdiction. You'll need to show credentials to enter." "You want credentials?" I stepped past the cones, boots hitting gravel hard. "Here's my deed." I pulled out my wallet and slapped my ID against his chest. "Brandon Mason, owner of every square foot under your sorry feet." He didn't move. "We're instructed to hold this perimeter until legal clarification." "And what happens if I walk past that fence line?" He opened his mouth, but the other guy beat him to it. "Then we have to report unauthorized access." I laughed, loud. "Son, you're standing in a cow field. You don't have jurisdiction to report a molehill." The second I stepped past them, one of them muttered something into a walkie. Within 20 minutes, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up. Deputy Mallory. Young, nervous, and clearly not ready for rancher politics. She asked me what was going on. I told her. I showed her my deed. I walked her to the fence and pointed at where it crossed the boundary. She agreed to file a report, but didn't remove the guards. "They say it's under administrative dispute," she offered weakly. "I can't clear the checkpoint until the court gives us guidance." I stared at her like she was speaking Finnish. That night, I got the second hit. A formal letter from the County Land Board stating that, due to legal ambiguity regarding land grants of 1923, the southern boundary of my property was under review. They'd received updated claims and affidavits from Red Vista HOA and would be issuing a temporary land use moratorium pending clarification. Temporary moratorium? On my own damn land. I stormed into the barn office and told Joe to keep every tractor, every worker, and every head of cattle away from the disputed area until further notice. Not because I was backing down, but because I wasn't giving them a single excuse to accuse me of violating preservation protocols. I knew a setup when I saw one. Just before midnight, I walked back to the ridge, spotlight in hand. The cones were still there. So was the folding table. Nobody manning it now, just a pamphlet flapping in the wind. On it, in cheerful blue lettering, Welcome to Red Vista Meadow Greenbelt, a community reclaimed. I folded it once, then again, until the words vanished into a tight little square. Then I set it on fire. The morning after the fake checkpoint stunt, I was halfway through my third cup of coffee when Joe barged into my kitchen without knocking. That wasn't like him. His face was pale, jaw locked tight. "It's Denny," he said. They jumped him. I set the mug down so hard it cracked the countertop. Denny was one of my newer ranch hands, a local kid, barely 21, quiet and built like a barn. He'd been running fencing checks near Cotton Hollow that morning when, according to Joe, he was confronted by two of the same Red Vista security goons. They accused him of sabotaging infrastructure, then shoved him into a steel gate. The gate caught him across the temple, split his eyebrow open, and knocked him down hard enough he blacked out for a minute. They left him there. Joe found him stumbling back toward the main trail, bloody and dazed. I drove straight to the sheriff's office with Denny sitting beside me, a towel pressed against his face. His eye was swelling shut. Sheriff Klein was waiting when we walked in. He'd seen the report from the earlier perimeter incident. He didn't look surprised, just tired. Too many complaints piling up from this HOA circus. "You going to arrest someone, or should I start deputizing bulls?" I snapped. He exhaled slowly, nodded toward the back. "Let's get a statement on the record first." We sat in that bland interview room while Denny gave every detail. Times, what they looked like, what they said, how they laughed while he bled. Klein didn't interrupt once. When it was done, he leaned forward. "I'll file it. But if they're claiming this happened on HOA jurisdiction, they'll say it's an internal matter." I laughed bitterly. They assaulted my employee on my land. Legally, we're stuck until that boundary gets resolved. That boundary never moved, I growled. It only moved in the imagination of a woman who prints signs faster than she reads maps. Klein raised a hand. "I'm on your side, Brandon, but you know how this works. We can't enforce where we're not officially authorized. Not without a court order." That evening, I called Nadine. She listened to everything, then calmly asked if I had a copy of the 1923 Land Act they were referencing. "Sort of," I said. "Found a scan from the state archive. But there's a catch. It was officially voided by a federal land reassignment decision in 1957. I've got the ruling too." "Send both to me. Now." By nightfall, Nadine called back, voice sharp. "They're using the 1923 Act, but the documents they filed are not copies. They're reproductions, digitally altered, poorly at that, fonts that didn't exist in the 20s, missing verification seals. Someone forged them." "They filed forgeries with the county?" I asked. "Not just filed, used them to trigger administrative review, and somehow got the land board to accept them." That hit me harder than I expected. Not because I was surprised. At this point, I wouldn't put arson past Karen, but because I realized how far she'd already gotten. She wasn't just posturing. She'd penetrated the system. Over the next few days, things escalated fast. My hands were blocked from accessing grazing lands. HOA guards took to driving ATVs across the outer trail and stopping anyone with a Mason Ranch jacket. Someone slashed the tires on my old hay trailer. Then came the real punch. A drone operator I'd hired to document property lines caught footage of a new construction staging area. Bulldozers, gravel piles, portable toilets, all stashed in a corner of my lower valley. That was the last straw. I sent the footage to Nadine, and she filed an emergency injunction the next morning. While she handled the legal side, I got busy building my own case. I pulled out my grandfather's original property survey, the yellow deed from 1954, and the letter from the Department of the Interior confirming private ownership post-1957. I called an old contact from the state archive, a woman named Celeste who'd once helped me restore a war medal for my grandfather's funeral. Celeste did better than confirm the forgery. She traced the fake 1923 map insert back to a known HOA-aligned land consultant named Parker Delano, who'd been disciplined 2 years ago for boundary manipulation in a different county. We had them, but I wasn't celebrating yet. Not until those concrete posts were in a pile of rubble and Karen's smug face was off my land for good. So I drove to the ridge, stood on the highest point where the grass bent like waves, and stared south. They wanted a war. They were about to get one with dates, signatures, aerial footage, and enough legal filings to choke a lobbyist. By the time the court accepted Nadine's emergency injunction, I'd barely slept in 3 days. The order came down at 9:42 a.m. on a Thursday. All activity by Red Vista HOA on the disputed tract shall cease immediately pending further adjudication. No exceptions. No loopholes. Signed by Judge Halverson, who I knew from a few ag expos and who once fined a mining company for damaging trout habitats. I printed out 3 copies and taped one to the inside of my truck window before heading south. Sure enough, the little HOA guard station was still up, but the folding table was gone, replaced by a prefab shed they'd trucked in sometime that week. When I pulled up, a rent-a-cop in wraparound shades stepped out holding a clipboard. "Sir, I need to verify—" I slapped the court order against the plexiglass window of his booth. "Here's your verification." He squinted. "This doesn't look—" "It's a restraining order from a judge, and you're about 30 seconds from being in contempt of court if you don't start packing." He radioed someone while I stood there, arms crossed, tapping my boot on the dirt. A few minutes later, a dusty pickup rolled in with HOA's construction foreman, same guy I'd seen in drone footage, now looking like a dog who heard thunder. They packed up within the hour, but it wasn't over, not even close. That afternoon, Nadine and I filed a civil countersuit against Red Vista HOA and its president Karen Branton for trespassing, assault, attempted fraud, and property damage. We included photo evidence, drone footage, survey maps, and sworn affidavits. Denny's medical report alone could have bought a new lawsuit by itself. We also requested discovery access to Red Vista's HOA meeting minutes, internal communications, and land acquisition plans. Nadine's words: "If there's blood in the water, I want the whole trail of footprints that led to it." Then I did something I hadn't done in years. I called a local news station. They showed up the next morning, all bright-eyed and looking for drama. I gave them a tour, showed them the signs, the drone footage, the scraped-up corner of pasture where bulldozers had chewed through decades-old prairie. The reporter, a sharp woman named Tasha Lowe, asked if she could film me reading from the restraining order. "Sure," I said, "but make sure you get a shot of the busted gate and the part where they assaulted my employee." The story aired that night. 5 minutes of solid footage, aerial shots, zoom-ins on the fake checkpoint, a map overlay of my deed compared to Red Vista's claimed boundaries, and a close-up of the court order. HOA's name was everywhere. Karen's name, even bigger, which must have pissed her off because the next day she held her own press conference in front of her subdivision's flower-lined welcome sign. She looked like someone preparing to run for PTA president and state governor at the same time. Perfect hair, power blazer, standing at a podium labeled Red Vista Meadow Restoring What Was Taken. She claimed I was a threat to ecological balance and accused me of disrupting a community's historical right to access shared open space. She cited runoff from cattle operations, dangerous fencing, and, my personal favorite, intimidation tactics using vehicles and armed guards. I nearly choked on my sandwich watching it, but it worked for about 3 hours. That's when Tasha Lowe published the second piece, a follow-up including actual photos of HOA personnel assaulting Denny, along with a scanned version of the federal land ruling from 1957. It ended with a voiceover. Mr. Mason says he's not just defending a ranch, he's defending the rule of law. By the weekend, things were boiling. Locals began picking sides. Some of the residents of Red Vista left anonymous tips on our legal site. Internal memos, HOA newsletters, and even an unofficial expansion map showing Red Vista's planned sprawl into 12 nearby properties, including mine. A few tipped off local law enforcement that Karen had a cozy relationship with a certain county clerk named Tanner Reeves. Nadine went into bloodhound mode. She subpoenaed Reeves' correspondence. Meanwhile, I hired 2 independent surveyors and an archival geologist who specialized in old land claims. They were professionals, the kind who carried chain-link measuring tape and wore boots older than most lawyers. They confirmed what we already knew. The boundary hadn't budged in a century. Karen's version was fantasy fiction dressed up in Times New Roman. Just when I thought we had a week to breathe, someone tried to sabotage one of our irrigation stations. Joe found the wires pulled out, filters yanked, bolts scattered like gravel. A game trail cam nearby captured a blurry image of a Red Vista maintenance truck driving away from the tree line. I didn't call the cops this time. I called a federal land investigator. The courtroom smelled like pine cleaner and old paper, just enough bureaucracy to make your skin itch. It was the preliminary hearing for both the injunction and the early stages of my civil countersuit. Karen was there, of course. She sat across the aisle in a navy blazer, tapping her pen like a Morse code machine on her legal pad. Her lawyer, some guy from Casper with slick hair and a $600 watch, looked like he thought he was about to win a class action suit against God himself. I didn't bring theatrics. Just Nadine, a few thick binders, a USB drive full of drone footage, and the original plat map from 1954, laminated so no one could accidentally smudge it. The judge was Honorable Miriam Keene. Older, sharp, and known for not tolerating time wasters, she looked over the top of her glasses and started the session like she'd been waiting all week to cut through the crap. Red Vista's lawyer launched into a speech about historic ambiguity, public access rights, and the 1923 Reclamation Charter. Nadine let him talk. She even nodded a few times like she was watching a 5-year-old explain how airplanes flap their wings. Then it was our turn. Nadine stood up, all 5'2" of her, and dropped the laminated deed onto the clerk's desk like a gauntlet. Your Honor, what the plaintiff fails to mention is that their entire claim rests on a document that was rendered void by a federal court in 1957. That decision reassigned the disputed lands to private ownership under homesteading provisions. My client's deed, property surveys, and tax records all corroborate uninterrupted ownership since 1954. She paused just long enough for the courtroom to absorb it. But more importantly, she said, sliding a flash drive across the table, we have evidence that the documents used to trigger this review process were not only outdated, but fabricated. The maps submitted by Red Vista HOA use fonts that didn't exist in 1923, GPS markers that were only introduced in the 2000s, and a seal that doesn't match the one used by the State Land Board during that era. Judge Keene narrowed her eyes at Karen's attorney. Is that true? He adjusted his tie. We don't believe that discredits the... Keene cut him off. I wasn't asking about belief. I asked if it's true. He hesitated. The documents were reconstructed from fragments and recreated for legibility. So, they're not originals? No, Your Honor. Nadine didn't even need to smile. The courtroom did it for her. Then came the kicker. We called a witness, a former member of the Red Vista HOA board named Cheryl Metzger. Cheryl looked nervous but determined, clutching a manila envelope like it was evidence from a crime scene. She'd resigned from the HOA 3 months earlier, and she came in voluntarily after seeing the news reports. I left because I didn't want to be part of it anymore, she said. Karen told us the expansion plan was legal. She said the land was underutilized and that we'd get backing from the county if we just pushed it hard enough. But when I asked for the original documents, she said they were pending authentication and not to worry. Then the fake maps started circulating, and someone from the board, I won't name who, bragged about making things official with a few friendly hands at the clerk's office. That's when I quit. Judge Keene leaned back and stared at Karen, whose expression had frozen somewhere between constipation and pure panic. Cheryl submitted copies of internal HOA emails. Nadine submitted a signed affidavit from Celeste at the State Archive, formally declaring the submitted land grant documents as reconstructions of no legal value. The geodetic expert followed up, stating under oath that Red Vista's property line claims were not only inaccurate, but geometrically impossible. It should have ended there, but Keene wasn't done. I'm also aware of reports involving intimidation of ranch staff, unauthorized construction, and disruption of agricultural infrastructure, she said. That will be addressed in the civil suit. But before we close this hearing, I'd like to ask if either party is aware that 3 other landowners adjacent to the Mason estate have received similar reclamation notices from Red Vista HOA in the past 60 days? The room went silent. Nadine shook her head. No, Your Honor, but we would like to request subpoena power to contact those landowners. Keene nodded. Granted, I want the full scope of this mapped before trial. Karen's lawyer tried to object, but it didn't matter. The look on Keene's face made it clear. The dam had cracked. Outside the courthouse, the press was already waiting. I didn't speak. Nadine did. The law is clear, she told the cameras. HOA boundaries are not wishful thinking. And you can't steal land just because you brought a podium and a banner. Karen didn't give a statement. She shoved past the cameras, face twisted, and ducked into a black SUV. Later that evening, I received an anonymous envelope in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a printed map. The HOA's 5-year expansion plan. My property wasn't the only one they wanted. It was just the first. The call came at 6:14 a.m. on a Monday. Joe's voice was low and urgent. They're back. Trucks. A whole convoy. Looks like they're bringing in more prefab. I didn't say a word, just grabbed my coat, stepped into my boots, and drove. The fog hadn't yet lifted from the lower valley, that shallow morning kind that clings to the ground like the ghost of winter. As I crested the ridge near Cotton Hollow, I saw them, 3 flatbeds, 1 cement mixer, and a crew in hard hats already unloading pallets marked with the Red Vista HOA logo. I parked just beyond the gate and walked straight through, ignoring the rent-a-guards who scrambled to intercept me. Karen was there. Of course she was, standing with a clipboard like she was supervising the construction of the Taj Mahal. "Brandon," she said coolly, as though we were old friends meeting at a bake sale. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" She didn't flinch. "Resuming development of Phase 1. The court ruling was temporary. Our appeal is pending. Our lawyers believe we're within our rights to proceed with community reclamation." "Karen," I cut her off, "you're violating a standing court order." She smiled. Not for long. Before I could respond, 2 of her workers started hammering stakes into the ground. One of them had already spray-painted a rough outline for a parking lot on land where my cattle had grazed 2 months ago. I turned and walked back to my truck, pulled out my phone, and made 2 calls. First, Nadine. Second, Sheriff Klein. By 8:15 a.m., 2 sheriff's units rolled up. Deputies stepped out, scanned the scene, then walked over to me with tight faces. Klein wasn't with them, but his name was on the incident log. One of the deputies, Marshall I think, nodded toward the construction area. "You say they broke the order?" I handed him a sealed copy of the injunction, plus a flash drive with time-stamped drone footage from earlier that morning. "Violation in progress." He didn't argue. He turned on his radio and called it in. 10 minutes later, a county enforcement truck pulled in, followed by a car I didn't expect to see. Assistant District Attorney Ruthie Tran. Ruthie was all business. She wore flat shoes and carried a folder marked in red ink, "Branton Unauthorized Activity." I watched as Ruthie and the deputies approached Karen. She didn't notice them at first. She was too busy directing some poor guy to center the walkway between 2 planted flag markers. "Mrs. Branton," Ruthie called. Karen turned. Her smile dropped the moment she saw the badge. "Is there a problem?" she asked, voice faltering. "Yes," Ruthie said. "You're in direct violation of a standing judicial injunction and multiple civil property statutes." "I have an appeal pending," Karen snapped. "Your office should have received our motion." "We did," Ruthie said. "It was denied 3 days ago, which makes your presence here—" "I have legal authority, grounds for arrest," Ruthie finished. Karen's mouth opened, then closed. Her eyes darted toward the camera crew she'd brought with her. 2 guys in cargo vests filming this circus for some HOA social media page. The cameras kept rolling as Ruthie nodded at the deputies. Karen took a step back. "This is political. You're weaponizing the legal system against—" She didn't get to finish. They cuffed her. Right there. On my land. In front of her crew, her workers, and a family of mule deer staring from the tree line like they'd been waiting for this day too. The guards didn't resist. They just backed away slowly as one of the deputies read Karen her rights. She twisted in their grip, still shouting about due process and preservation rights and the People's Park. I watched it all in silence. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. But I felt something like gravity returning to the ground. As they led her to the cruiser, one of the cameramen had the nerve to ask, "Mr. Mason, care to comment?" I looked right into the lens. That's what happens when you mistake arrogance for authority. By noon, the construction crews were gone. Deputies had cordoned off the site and slapped warning notices on every structure. A county inspector showed up with a clipboard and red tape. Everything was marked for demolition. Joe and I stood by the fence watching the process. One of the cement pallets had been labeled Community Unity Station. Joe spat in the grass. "Bet that's where they were going to put the picnic tables." "That," I said, "or the gallows." By the end of the day, local news had picked up the footage. Karen's mugshot was already circulating. Red Vista HOA issued a vague statement about ongoing legal challenges and misunderstandings regarding jurisdiction. No apology, no retraction, just more spin. But this time, no one was buying it. They'd seen her taken down, shackled and screaming by the very legal system she'd tried to manipulate. And that was only the beginning. Karen's arraignment made the evening news. Not just local, regional. By morning, her mugshot was plastered on every affiliate station between Sheridan and Cheyenne. One anchor even called it the most spectacular HOA meltdown in Wyoming history. I couldn't argue with that. By noon, I got a call from someone I hadn't spoken to since my grandfather's funeral, District Attorney Corbin Hale. "Mr. Mason," he said, "thought it was time we had a more official conversation." I met Corbin the next day at the county courthouse. Tall, hard-set man, former Marine, the kind who'd shake your hand like he was sizing up your wrist bones. He didn't waste time. "We're moving forward with felony charges against Karen Branton," he said. "Forgery of public records, attempted land fraud, conspiracy to defraud, and criminal trespass in the second degree. Possibly more if what your lawyer says about the clerk's office pans out." "She didn't act alone," I said. "No." He agreed. "And we're going to find out who else signed off." Turns out Nadine's subpoenas had paid off. The clerk, Tanner Reeves, had been quietly feeding the HOA adjusted parcel maps for months. The same guy who once lost my filing paperwork for a new irrigation permit. Now he was on the verge of being named an unindicted co-conspirator. Nadine pushed harder. She compiled a detailed timeline connecting Reeves' document approvals with HOA meeting minutes and internal emails. One in particular stood out, a note from Karen to the board. "Tanner confirmed insertion by next cycle. Get the monument signs ready." They were already planning the park opening before filing anything. Meanwhile, Red Vista tried to distance themselves. Their board called an emergency meeting and suspended Karen as president pending resolution. But it was too little, too late. Emails came flooding in from residents, some furious, some embarrassed. One said they felt like pawns in a fake land war. Another simply wrote, "We want out." Karen's lawyer filed a motion for release pending trial. It was denied. "She's a flight risk," Judge Keene ruled, "and has demonstrated repeated disregard for lawful process." That same week, Corbin's office filed a formal motion to investigate misuse of public resources by the HOA. Apparently, some of the funds earmarked for Greenbelt Phase 1 had gone toward campaign donations for 2 county supervisors. One of them resigned before Friday. The scandal was snowballing. The Red Vista HOA website went dark. Their Facebook page turned off comments. One of the remaining board members, a man named Stephen Wynn, called Nadine and offered full cooperation in exchange for immunity. "I didn't know," he insisted. "Karen handled the maps. We just trusted her." "Then help us prove it," Nadine replied. He did. Stephen handed over hard drives, Dropbox folders, and a USB labeled backups, Karen Final. Inside were dozens of internal drafts, some with track changes showing alterations to boundary lines, meeting prep notes marked "Don't mention plat history," and a scanned letter to the county labeled "Reassignment Proposal as Confidential, Destroy After Review." We were building a criminal enterprise case, layer by layer. Meanwhile, back on the land, things were finally quiet. The illegal fencing had been removed. County surveyors, now acting under a court-appointed commission, re-established the true boundaries and reconfirmed my ownership. They even brought out the original stone markers set by the Corps of Engineers in the 60s, one of which had been buried under HOA's picnic area plans. Locals started calling the area the Line. Some came by just to see it. A few brought folding chairs. Still, I didn't relax. Not fully. Karen had started this war with signs and lies, but what made her dangerous wasn't just ambition. It was how close she got to making it stick. If we hadn't reacted fast, if Nadine hadn't been relentless, if Cheryl hadn't spoken up, hell, if Denny hadn't taken that hit, we might be grazing cattle on HOA picnic tables right now. One morning, Joe walked in holding the mail. No words, just handed me an envelope from the Wyoming Department of Land Integrity. Inside was a letter confirming the launch of a full state audit into Red Vista HOA and its financial and zoning practices. At the bottom, handwritten, "Thank you for defending what's ours. Director Janice Harper." I looked out across the ridge that day and knew something had shifted, not just on paper, not just in the courtroom, in the balance of power. Courtroom 3 was standing room only. Reporters, landowners, HOA residents, even a few local ranchers I hadn't seen since my grandfather's wake. The bailiff had to open the overflow room and stream the hearing live on a projection screen. No one wanted to miss it. Karen was brought in wearing a gray suit that had seen better days and a glare that could curdle milk. She looked thinner, harder, like someone who'd spent the last few weeks sleeping on cold decisions. Her lawyer sat beside her, looking like he'd lost 10 pounds of confidence since the last hearing. The case had been fast-tracked thanks to the pressure Nadine and the state brought. With the evidence we had, altered documents, forged seals, staff confessions, and a financial trail that looked like a toddler's spaghetti drawing, it wasn't a matter of if she'd be convicted. It was a matter of how much time they'd give her. The trial lasted 8 days. Nadine opened with the land deed, the 1957 federal ruling, and the original stone boundary markers. She walked the jury through every fake document, every digital alteration, and every lie Karen had filed to the county clerk's office. Then she showed the emails. Karen's words in her own voice. Once the signs go in, people assume it's already law. Get it on paper first, clean up the truth later. They won't fight us. It's just one guy with a bunch of cows. The courtroom was dead silent when Nadine played the voicemail Karen left for Clerk Tanner Reeves 2 days before the first illegal post went in. Just push it through. The board approved it unanimously. The land's practically abandoned. Mason won't know what hit him. Then came the witness stack. Denny took the stand, his eye still showing a faint scar where the steel gate met his face. He told the jury what happened. Joe testified about the sabotage at the irrigation station. Cheryl Metzger, brave as ever, read aloud the final board memo Karen issued. This land will be a public gem, no matter who has to be removed. Even the drone footage made it in. Clear shots of fencing being erected, workers hauling signs across. Property they had no right to touch. Nadine's closing argument was a masterclass in understatement. This wasn't a clerical error, she said. It was a calculated campaign of deception. It wasn't a land dispute. It was a hostile takeover by a homeowner with a clipboard and delusions of grandeur. Karen's defense tried everything, claimed good faith, blamed Tanner, claimed improper digital preservation. At one point, her lawyer even suggested the boundary markers were misinterpreted prairie artifacts. The jury wasn't buying it. On the 9th day, they returned with a verdict. Guilty on all counts. Forgery of public records, fraudulent land seizure, conspiracy, criminal trespass, obstruction of justice, assault by proxy. Judge Keene didn't waste time. She stared Karen down like a hawk sizing up a rat. Ms. Branton, you orchestrated an organized and deliberate fraud that threatened the rights of multiple landowners, endangered individuals, and exploited your community's trust. This court finds no mitigating factors, only malice cloaked in bureaucracy. Then came the gavel. 12 years in state prison. No parole for the first 8. Karen didn't cry, didn't scream, just sat there, blinking like her brain couldn't catch up. HOA's fate came quickly after that. Red Vista Meadow was declared financially insolvent within 72 hours. Their bank accounts frozen, assets seized, and a court-appointed liquidator took control. The HOA board formally resigned in disgrace, and a class action suit from its own residents followed within the week. Damages, $2.3 million awarded to me, plus additional fines to 3 other landowners targeted by the expansion scheme. The land itself, fully restored. The illegal fencing removed, the equipment auctioned, the concrete posts jackhammered into gravel. The county repaved the access trails per historical layout, with new survey markers placed every quarter mile. As a final act, the state of Wyoming declared the Mason Tract a preservation class zone of ecological and historical significance, offering a permanent easement and a conservation grant to ensure its protection. I didn't throw a party. I rode out to the southern ridge alone one evening, just as the sun dropped behind the hills. The air smelled like dry sage and ashwood, and the wind carried the kind of silence only earned by hard fights. I got off the horse and stood by the old stone marker. Someone had etched the date of the court ruling into it. Underneath, in small letters, land defended, rights upheld. Things moved fast after the verdict. Within a week, demolition crews arrived with county orders in hand. Everything Red Vista had built on my land, posts, fencing, security sheds, was ripped out and hauled away. The spot they called Community Unity Station was reduced to a pile of crushed concrete and twisted rebar. County surveyors came next. This time, no fake maps. Just old-school tools, historical charts, and a respect for boundaries that had been trampled once too often. They marked out the original lines, restored fence segments where needed, and reinstalled stone boundary markers with fresh date stamps. The state kept their word. A formal easement was granted, recognizing the southern 700 acres of my land as protected ecological space. In exchange, I received a conservation grant and permanent immunity from any future HOA-related claims. The agreement was signed by the state's director of land integrity herself. A few days later, a new HOA president was appointed, some accountant named Lisa Doran. She reached out politely, asked for a meeting. I agreed. She showed up alone, no blazer, no camera crew, no fake surveyor, just a folder in her lap and eyes that never quite met mine. We want to make clear that the current HOA has no interest in your land. We've dissolved all expansion plans, and we'd like to avoid further litigation. Good, I said. You stay on your side of the fence and I'll stay on mine. She nodded quickly. As she left, she made a wide circle around the ridge trail, avoiding the section where Karen had planted her first sign. That said enough. I replaced that spot with a new marker, a 6-foot cedar post, hand-carved with the words, "Private land, court protected, do not enter." Beneath it, a bronze plaque set in stone, sealed tight. It read, "This land was claimed by arrogance, defended by truth, and returned to the rightful hands." Life settled down after that. No more strangers wandering the fence line, no more fake signs, no more legal envelopes dropped on my porch like bad omens. Just the land, the sky, and the quiet work of putting things back the way they were. The grant from the state helped repair some of the pasture damage. We reseeded native grasses, restored the creek embankments, and even brought in a small team from the university to catalog native plant growth. For the first time in months, the ranch felt like mine again, not just in law, but in spirit. A few weeks later, I got an invitation to speak at a statewide landowners summit. I almost ignored it. Public speaking wasn't exactly my thing, but Nadine talked me into it. "They need to hear it," she said, "so it doesn't happen to the next guy." So I went. I stood at a podium in front of 200 ranchers, property owners, and even a few legislators, told them what happened, showed them the fake maps, the signs, the drone photos, told them how one woman with connections and arrogance almost stole what my family had built over generations, and how the system, slow, clumsy, but still intact, had stopped her. The applause was brief, quiet, respectful, exactly how I liked it. When I got home, I rode out to the South Ridge one last time. The marker I'd installed was still there, solid and unmoved, but someone, probably Joe, had added something beneath the bronze plaque. Just 3 words, burned into the cedar with a branding iron. Karen was here, and underneath that, in smaller letters, "Not anymore." I laughed out loud. First time in a long time. Then I turned back toward the house, toward the land that was still mine and always would be.